The day I officially resigned from my homeowners association, I thought I had finally freed myself from years of unnecessary stress and endless complaints. But what I didn't know was that my decision was about to set off the kind of neighborhood drama you usually only see in TV shows. For years, our HOA had been run like a kingdom, and the self-proclaimed queen was none other than Karen. She wasn't officially in charge, but everyone knew she acted like she owned the entire neighborhood. She would walk around with a little clipboard, snapping pictures of lawns that weren't perfectly trimmed, measuring driveways to see if cars were parked too long, and sending fines for things as ridiculous as garden gnomes not approved by HOA standards. I had dealt with her for too long. So when the opportunity came, I sold part of my property rights, officially resigned from the HOA, and decided I was done with all of it. To me, it was simple. My house, my rules. But to Karen, it was an act of war. A week later, as I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee, Karen marched down the street toward me with that familiar storm brewing on her face. She had her camera in one hand, her little clipboard in the other. "You can't just leave the HOA?" she shouted loud enough for the whole street to hear. "It's against the rules. You think you can just do whatever you want? Not in my neighborhood." I stayed calm. "Karen," I said evenly, "I followed the legal process. My lawyer filed the paperwork. I'm not in the HOA anymore, and you don't have any authority over my property." Her face turned red, almost purple. She hated being told she didn't have authority. And then she did exactly what everyone expected her to do. She pulled out her phone and called 911. The neighbors started gathering, some pretending to water their lawns, others openly standing on the sidewalk to watch. They'd all been victims of her harassment before, and now they were clearly enjoying the show. Karen was pacing back and forth, speaking loudly into the phone. "Yes, hello? I need the police immediately. My neighbor is breaking community rules, refusing HOA orders, and creating a disturbance. Yes, he's refusing to comply. Send someone now," I almost laughed. Community rules? Since when did that qualify as a police emergency? Within minutes, 2 squad cars pulled up. Karen practically ran to them, waving her arms dramatically like she had just witnessed a crime scene. "Officers, officers! That man is refusing HOA orders and causing a disturbance. You need to arrest him immediately." The police officers looked confused. One of them asked patiently, "Ma'am, what exactly did he do?" Karen threw her hands in the air. "He resigned from the HOA. He can't do that." "He's breaking the rules," the officer blinked. "Ma'am, resigning from an HOA isn't a crime." Karen gasped as if he had just insulted the crown jewels. "Of course it's a crime. It's against the contract. It's disorderly conduct. He's disturbing the peace." At that point, I stood up, calm and collected. But before I could even explain my side, my son stepped forward. He had just graduated from the police academy and was now serving as an officer in another district. He'd been visiting me that day, standing quietly behind me the whole time, but now he walked straight up to the officers and pulled out his badge. "Gentlemen," he said firmly, "I'm Officer Mitchell. Badge number .. I can assure you, my father has violated no laws. On the other hand," he turned his gaze to Karen, "what this woman has done is file a false police report, which is a crime." The crowd of neighbors murmured. Karen's face drained of color. "What? No, he's lying. This is all a setup. You can't do this to me. I'm the one in charge here." My son stayed professional, but you could see the steel in his eyes. "Ma'am, you don't get to waste police resources because you don't like that someone left your HOA. That's harassment. And filing false claims is an arrestable offense." Karen began to panic. She turned to the other officers, desperately pleading, "You don't understand. He's my neighbor. He can't just leave the HOA. The whole community will fall apart." One of the officers sighed. "Ma'am, community rules are not criminal laws. You had no business calling 911 for this." And then it happened, the most satisfying moment of my life. My son stepped forward, recited her rights, and placed her under arrest for filing a false report and harassment. The entire street went silent watching in disbelief as the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, the woman who had terrorized us for years with her rules and threats, was led to the squad car. She was shouting the whole way, "This isn't fair! You'll regret this, I'll sue all of you." But her voice grew smaller as the door shut and the car drove away. I turned to my son, proud and more relieved than I'd been in years. The neighbors clapped quietly, a few even chuckled, and for the first time in a long time, the street actually felt peaceful. That day I realized something important. Power built on fear doesn't last. Karen thought her clipboard and threats made her untouchable, but when the law finally stepped in, her empire of intimidation collapsed instantly. As the squad car rolled away with Karen sitting in the back, her voice muffled but still yelling. Through the glass, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, living under her reign of harassment, relief for so long. Our neighborhood had lived in fear of her constant complaints, threats of fines, and endless lectures about the rules. She wasn't just a neighbor, she had made herself into a warden, patrolling the streets as if the HOA were her personal police department. But now, that illusion of power had been shattered right in front of everyone. The neighbors who had gathered around slowly began to disperse, but not before exchanging knowing looks and small smiles. One older gentleman, who'd once been fined for having a flower pot the wrong color, walked past me and whispered, about time someone stood up to her. Another neighbor, a young mom, laughed quietly and said, this is the first time I've seen the kids play outside without her staring at them like a prison guard. It was clear, the spell Karen had cast over the block was broken. I turned to my son, and I couldn't help but feel proud, not just because he was an officer, but because he had the courage to handle the situation professionally and firmly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't let emotions take over. He just enforced the law as it was meant to be enforced. And ironically, the very authority Karen had tried to weaponize against us ended up being the thing that brought her down. That night, I sat on the porch again with another cup of coffee. The street was calm, almost unnervingly quiet compared to the chaos of the morning. I replayed the whole scene in my head, Karen screaming about rules, the officers trying to reason with her, my son stepping forward with his badge, the collective gasp of the neighbors as she was cuffed. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie, but what stood out most wasn't just the drama. It was the lesson. Karen had spent years believing that fear equaled respect. She thought if she barked loud enough, filed enough complaints, waved enough papers around, people would follow her without question. And for a long time it worked. People were too tired, too busy, too scared of fines or conflict to push back. But the truth is, respect can't be forced, it's earned. And when you try to control people through fear, eventually they push back. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes a breaking point. But it always happens. That day, the breaking point was me leaving the HOA to Karen. It wasn't about rules, it was about losing control. She couldn't stand the idea that someone could say no to her authority, and instead of letting it go, she doubled down, escalated, and crossed the line from nuisance to criminal. And here's the irony. If she had just left me alone, none of this would have happened. She could have kept her little clipboard patrols, kept making life annoying for people who didn't know how to fight back. But by calling the police on something that wasn't even a crime, she exposed herself. She revealed that her power wasn't real, it was only intimidation. That's why the arrest felt so symbolic. It wasn't just about one false report. It was about years of pent-up frustration finally being acknowledged, about a bully finally being held accountable,